Hello, my name is Alan Richardson. I'm the Chief Examiner for A-Level Art and Design. Welcome to the online inset program for A-Level Art and Design. This coursework marking training event is designed for teachers delivering our Pearson Edexcel A-Level Art and Design qualification. The training is broken down into 4 modules, of which modules 1 to 3 can be completed in your own time, and you can visit them as many times as you need. The structure of the modules is based around the principles we use when training our moderators. The 4 modules are as follows. Module 1, understanding the assessment requirements for components 1 and 2. Module 2, applying the assessment grids for components 1 and 2. Module 3, understanding the marks given for each portfolio. And Module 4, a live questions and answers session. The aim is to give you guidance and insight into the assessment tools provided by the specification, and this will enable you to mark your candidate's work fairly and accurately. The examples of candidates' work are not intended to represent recommended course structures or delivery. We are using them purely as real examples of work to which we can apply the assessment tools. Module 1 will briefly look at the specification and its requirements, and then explore in depth the performance calculator, which is the main assessment tool for this qualification. This generates the marks, which can then be transferred to the assessment grids. We will walk through the application of the performance calculator using a real candidate's work. We are very proud of our specification, which is designed to allow candidates to develop and explore their art practices to the highest standards. It has been proven to stretch candidates to achieve their optimum performances, and its structure extends both their understanding and their skill. Students can focus on a specialism depending on their skills and interests, and enter into just one title, or they can combine specialisms and enter for the title Art, Craft and Design. Each of the titles has a detailed description of its demands in the specification, and although they are separate disciplines, many of the requirements are common to all, such as the requirements to put their own work in context with other art and design practitioners. This is achieved through the written personal study in Component 1, as well as annotation in their supporting studies. The A-level comprises of 2 components: a coursework component, Component 1, the personal investigation, which is worth 60% of the qualification, and an exam component, Component 2, the externally set assignment, and that's worth 40% of the qualification. Although the A-level has 2 main components, Component 1 also includes a separate personal study. This is a written element that is marked separately with its own performance calculator. So let's look at Component 1, the personal investigation first. Candidates will be required to develop ideas and generate practical work using research from various sources. They will need to explore media and processes, develop and refine their ideas, and present an outcome or outcomes. The candidates will work from personal starting points. And for Part 1, the practical work, students will create supporting studies and personal outcomes. The supporting studies submitted for assessment should show the investigation and development done for both the Part 1, practical work, and also the Part 2, the personal study. For Part 2, students need to create a separate piece of continuous prose that explores subjects linked to their practical work. This piece of continuous prose must not be integrated with their sketchbook. It must be a minimum of 1,000 words, and we recommend 3,000 words as a guide for the upper limit of this study. It's worth noting that the students will not be penalized on the length of their personal studies if they fall short or exceed 3,000 words. But be aware, however, that if a student fails to meet the minimum word count, it's possible they will not achieve the required breadth and depth to access the full mark range. For ease of assessment, there are 2 performance calculators for Component 1. One is identical to the Component 2 calculator and is for the practical work, as both are marked out of 72. The second is individual to the written personal study and is marked out of 18. There are 72 marks available for the practical work and 18 marks available for the personal study. So component 1, the personal investigation, is marked out of 90 marks in total. So now let's look at component 2, the externally set assignment. Candidates will be required to respond to one externally set, broad-based thematic starting point to encourage independence in developing ideas, intentions, and resolving their outcomes. The theme will be released to both teachers and students on the 1st of February each year for assessment in June. We are not able to release the externally set assignment paper to teachers before the release date to students. This applies to all awarding organisations. However, there's nothing to say you have to release the paper to your students on 1st of February. You could choose to release it later to give yourself time to prepare the theme. Students will create preparatory studies and personal outcomes based on the starting points given in the externally set assignment paper. The period of sustained focus in which students create their personal outcomes under controlled conditions is 15 hours. And there are 72 marks available for component 2, the externally set assignment. So let's look at assessment. All of the examination boards follow the same principles for assessment of artwork. These basically break down the work down into 4 different aspects called assessment objectives. Each one of these assessment objectives is then given a mark. The total of these marks then goes forward to generate the final grade. In our specification, all the assessment objectives are equally weighted, and therefore each one represents 25% of the component mark. These will be referred to in this module as AO1, AO2, AO3 and AO4 respectively. As we work through the module, applying the assessment objectives, each AO will be defined in its relevant section. The assessment grid. The assessment grid is a document for formally documenting and presenting your marks for moderation. It is of limited use in marking, as most of its terms are very generic and cannot pinpoint with accuracy a candidate's performance levels. Marks generated by the performance calculator should be transferred to this document for formal presentation. The performance calculator is a table to be used in the same manner as a graph. It allows you to plot a candidate's performance with great accuracy, as its various levels describe, using a tried and tested taxonomy, the characteristics of candidates' work at each different level from 1 to 6. Once the marks are agreed, they then can be rapidly transferred to the assessment grid for formal presentation. Both the practical performance calculator and the personal study performance calculator have large empty boxes for you to fill in and write your reasoning behind your judgments. These are really useful to present to the visiting moderator, as they can readily see why you have placed candidates in their respective levels. Here is the practical performance calculator. This and the personal study performance calculator can be downloaded from our website. The performance calculators do not replace the official assessment grids. Rather, they are an additional tool developed to help you allocate marks more accurately. You do not have to use the performance calculators, and if you did choose to use them, moderators don't need to see a completed performance calculator. However, most centres are now using them in place of the assessment grids for the moderation, as they explain the centre's reasoning for their marking more explicitly. The performance calculators have been designed to help you determine the correct performance band before transferring your marks to the official assessment grids. There are instructions for how to use them on the reverse. We are now going to look at the performance calculator in practice on a candidate's work. We have chosen a component 1 because it demonstrates the use of both the practical work performance calculator and the personal study written work performance calculator. We will show you both performance calculators filled in with an actual candidate's achievement levels to demonstrate how they should be used. You'll be able to see how they work similarly to a graph, allowing you to accurately plot the candidate's position. The candidate has been anonymized, but for this demonstration we'll call her Ivy. This is her component 1, practical work and personal study. Ivy has entered for 9AD, art and design. She undertakes several projects throughout the course and in several different disciplines. There's a common theme running through her work which focuses around the beauty and fragility of nature and how decay and imperfection has its own beauty. The slide sequence first runs through her entire body of practical work. We will then look at it in detail and how her position is derived at on the performance calculator, exploring each assessment objective in turn. We will then look at her personal study and mark that using the dedicated personal study performance calculator. Ivy undertakes several different smaller projects under her overarching theme of imperfections. She looks at how imperfection in nature can be seen as beautiful and what is perceived as beauty in women. Her personal study also addresses these issues and looks at the work of three artists, Billy Kidd, Seung-Wan Oh, and Sam Taylor Wood. We will first look through her entire body of work, minus the personal study, to get an overview of the submission. We'll then look individually at a selection of slides that define her levels of performance in each of the assessment objectives. After that, we'll look at her personal study in detail. Please take your time to go through the slides. There will be no commentary during those slides. The commentary will resume on slide 60 at the end of this run. Now we have seen Ivy's practical work, we will look at each assessment objective in turn and extract sample slides from the submission to illuminate the reasons behind her placement on the performance calculator. Obviously, in the time frame we have, we cannot look in detail at all of Ivy's submission. So here are selected groups of slides that we feel justify her marks. Ivy sits firmly in level 5 for her development of ideas, with a mid-level 5 mark of 14, as none of the descriptors in the levels either side of that level apply. Each avenue she explores is sustained and highly inventive, from her working on real leaves to her stitching into her portrait canvases. So using the performance calculator in the manner of a graph, you can see that this places her clearly in mid-level 5. This is a very important slide in Ivy's presentation, as this is where she summarizes her progress and gives valuable insight into her aims and objectives. She explains that she started the coursework component by looking at 3 artists who had explored similar themes to herself, and how these studies led to her own explorations and experiments. Her genuine creative journey shows perceptive and insightful development. She takes care to refine and reflect upon her progress, and each idea is taken on a sustained path to a successful resolution. Here, Ivy plays with the idea of beauty being skin deep by actually breaking up the surface she is working on with a chisel. When her first attempts are unsuccessful, she tries a second method with greater success, demonstrating her inventive and comprehensive control over the formal elements. Here, Ivy is experimenting with the idea of superimposing images of beautiful women onto decaying flowers using Photoshop, and also the relationship of women to flowers and their potential as metaphors. She likes this concept of amalgamating the beauty of decay with popular perceived conceptions of female beauty. This results in some original and sensitive outcomes, which she is quick to recognize and comment on. She progressively develops her ideas through sustained and pertinent experimentation. Not content with simply presenting her painted leaves as final outcomes, Ivy pushes the idea further by experimenting with the sculptural qualities of mobiles. Although perhaps not as successful as her final paintings on leaves, it demonstrates her willingness to invent and explore different solutions in a genuinely creative way. All the time she's reviewing and evaluating the outcomes with insight. Assessment Objective 2 is one of Ivy's strongest elements, as she hits all of the criteria in level 5 and almost crosses into level 6. She ticks 2 of the criteria in level 6, that of genuine discovery and accepting the unexpected. This pushes her to the top of level 5 with a mark of 15. Here is her position on the performance calculator. You can see from the words used in the commentary so far how they fit into the taxonomy at the top of level 5 in this assessment objective. Ivy tries many different media whilst experimenting with how to make visual statements about her model. The pose of the figure and the selection of the image are all important considerations. This slide shows how, when she successfully embroiders the image, she finds the back of the embroidery with its disorder and tangle of threads just as interesting, or perhaps even more interesting, than the front. Ivy tries working with clay to experiment with surface textures and acquire skills in a 3-dimensional medium. She then uses her clay tiles as still life subjects to experiment with drawing mediums and techniques, analyzing the results and logging them for future use. Here again we see consistent, comprehensive critical perception with sensitive control over the formal elements. These are all level 5 criteria. This slide shows Ivy's experiments with combining images of dying flowers and beautiful models. She uses many techniques from Photoshop to collage to achieve a successful image, and then produces studies of these using monoprints. Ivy uses various techniques and methods to try and achieve the effect she desires, including making a three-dimensional mobile from her leaf experiments. She spends some time working on how to prepare the leaf surfaces for painting before she embarks on the portrait studies. She also tries different environments for her mobile to see which is most effective. Assessment Objective 3 is looking at Ivy's ability to glean and document useful information to help drive her individual investigations forward. These resources can be contextual or visual. The real issue is whether or not they are pertinent to the projects undertaken and the skill with which they are recorded. On the performance calculator, you can see that Ivy again falls right in the middle of level 5. She matches all of the descriptors in this level. Her investigations are personal and imaginative, but not highly inventive. Here, Ivy is building her resources for a portrait painting that reflects her interest in nature and perfect and imperfect relationships. She is contrasting the ethereal beauty of a dying rose with the happiness of a cheerful model. The idea is that this juxtaposition exaggerates both aspects. What is interesting is the depth to which she explores and records both subjects, demonstrating perceptive, comprehensive, and sustained critical analysis and reflection. One of Ivy's projects, linked to her generic theme of imperfections, relates to self-esteem and body image. As part of her research, she explores how the media deal with these issues, and you can see from this slide how she analyzes and then lets the information influence her photo shoot for her paintings. She talks about negative space and how the background influences the model, and how low-angle shots make the model seem more important and powerful. This is one of the situations where she shows imagination rather than high levels of invention. In this slide, Ivy is exploring the idea of imperfect people by distorting and fragmenting portraits. She has been inspired by the work of Jens Hess. She tries many different ways of distortion before settling on one she feels makes the statement she wants about the theme of broken self. Again, we can see the in-depth reflection of each composition and the genuine creative journey she undertakes in each project. Ivy responds to the distorted photographs by producing these fragmented portrait images. She likes the realism of these representations being broken by defined sheer lines, creating an abstract final composition. These demonstrate her illustrative skills and sensitivity, which show a comprehensive control over the formal elements. These skills acquired during the course are reflected in each of her final outcomes. Assessment Objective 4 measures Ivy's ability to put all of her research and resources together to create meaningful outcomes that satisfy her creative intent. She achieves this several times through her coursework component and fully realizes all of her aims and objectives. Ivy achieves a mark of 14 in Assessment Objective 4. She fulfills all of the criteria in Level 5, but does not reach any of those in Level 6. Neither does she exhibit any in Level 4. This places her firmly in mid-band Level 5. Ivy's subtle use of watercolor in this painting models the features of her subject with skill and sensitivity. She manages to capture not only a true likeness of the sitter, but also the way that the glass edges fragment and reflect the image. Her use of color and tone reflect a comprehensive control over the formal elements. This is an early piece in her coursework, but demonstrates her ability to refine and reflect with insight. Here is another early work by Ivy. In this portrait, she switches media to work in oil pastel and degrades the surface of the paper to give a sense of peeling and flaking. Here again, she handles the medium with sensitivity and control to achieve the results she desires. This is one of Ivy's later pieces, where she draws upon prior experience to pull all of the elements together into a very successful piece that uses all of her skills and experiments. It also shows a developing understanding of the use of metaphor and juxtaposition. The piece fully realizes all of its aims and objectives and is imaginative and perceptive. The piece does not represent sophistication that goes beyond her aims, however, and therefore does not approach the boundary of level 6. Ivy's paintings on leaves also draw on her illustrative skills developed throughout the course. Here, however, they take a highly inventive turn, fraught with technical difficulties that Ivy seeks to resolve. She loves the qualities of the surface, but obviously the fragility of such a surface creates issues. Undaunted, she experiments with strengthening the surface, and this results in some very successful final paintings. In this highly inventive and exciting painting, Ivy sensitively exploits all of the work she has done throughout the course to produce an evocative piece that sums up her feelings about natural decay and feminine beauty. She resolves the technical difficulties associated with painting on leaves and creates a canvas by gluing and stitching many leaves together. She then uses this for an accomplished oil painting of her model in a carefully considered pose. All of these elements are brought together to create an insightful and original outcome. Here is the completed practical performance calculator for Ivy, showing how her achievement is plotted like a graph to arrive at a score of 57. This must now be combined with the mark from her personal study to arrive at the total score for this component. The mark for the personal study is out of 18, so we will now apply the personal study performance calculator to her submission and then calculate her final mark. The personal study is a written exploration of other artists' approaches to art and design. The study needs to have relevance to the art practice of the candidate, and it's important that it feeds and informs a candidate's own art practices. In fact, one of the taxonomy criteria relates to the level at which the study informs the candidate's own artistic development. The total mark for component 1 is out of 90. 72 of these marks come from the practical work, and the further 18 marks come from the written personal study. Here is the performance calculator for the personal study. You can see that all of the assessment objectives are generically applied to each level, and each level also has a specific criterion for the use of written language. To demonstrate its use in practice, we will go through each assessment objective in turn as we look at Ivy's presentation. Please note that each assessment objective is not given an individual mark. We are simply breaking it down in this presentation to add clarity and show how each assessment objective plays its part in determining the final mark. Firstly, we will run through her entire dissertation so that you can get a feel for the style and length of this element. Ivy's personal study explores how 3 artists portrayed decay in their work. There will be no commentary until slide 97 to give you an opportunity to have a look at each page of her dissertation. Assessment Objective 4 measures Ivy's ability to put all of her research and resources together to create meaningful outcomes that satisfy her creative intent. She achieves this several times through the coursework component and fully realizes all of her aims and objectives. So, Ivy scores 11 in level 4 for her entire personal study, as she also scores 11 in each assessment objective. So let us look at why. We will start by looking at assessment objective 1 and selecting some pages from her essay to illuminate why she is achieving the mark given. Assessment objective 1 is about idea development and Ivy's understanding and critical analysis. She is presenting a study on how artists have portrayed aspects of decay in their work. She is interested in how something that should be unpleasant can be portrayed as beautiful. She looks at the work of 3 artists, Billy Kidd, Seung Hwan Oh, and Sam Taylor Wood. She makes informed comment with some perception and fulfills her aims, but sometimes lapses into description rather than analysis, and diverts into description of her own work. Her writing is very competent and consistent, and she does have effective use of written language. Her work is engaged and does perceptively inform her practical work. As you can see, these criteria all fall into the mid-band of level 4. She talks about the relationship her chosen artist had with nature. For example, Seung Hwan Oh's intentionally using organic decay and how this related to her leaf project. However, the link is gestural rather than authoritative. Had her links been authoritative, she would have moved closer to the level 5 border. As it is, she spends a lot of time describing her own art practice without really deconstructing and fully understanding the aesthetics of the artist she is studying. She rarely describes the visual and aesthetic qualities generated by decay and their impact on the work. Assessment objective 2, in relationship to the written element, is about how Ivy uses the resources she is studying to present her point of view. Is she selecting relevant references, a good breadth of them to cover her topic, and using them in an effective way to present her argument? Ivy stays in mid-level 4 for this objective with a mark of 11. Here you can see Ivy uses language in a competent and consistent way, but she still tends to tell you what the artists do rather than saying what she personally feels about the visual impact of their techniques. There is some perception, and her study is certainly engaged. However, here again, there is no real authority in her understanding, and therefore her refinement of her argument is purposeful rather than insightful. Also, she rapidly returns to the safety of describing her own art practice rather than pursuing the artist's intent with any depth. She chooses an effective selection of artists rather than a comprehensive one. It would have shown greater depth to choose a wider range of art movements and techniques to embrace her ideas about how artists have used decay in their work, as artists have for a long time explored these ideas, from the Dutch memento mori artists right up to contemporary practitioners. This level of depth would have taken her closer to level 5. Assessment objective 3 relates here to how well Ivy collects and gleans pertinent information from the contextual resources she selects, and how she uses them to build and strengthen her points of view and arguments. It can be said that this objective represents the formal elements of the written element, in the same way that AO3 represents the formal elements in the practical work. The formal elements here are obviously grammar and spelling, along with the clarity of presentation. Ivy is also mid-band level 4 for this objective. You can see in this slide that Ivy has a consistent and effective use of written language. However, it never really becomes creative or exciting criteria from level 5. Instead, she uses her language to describe the impact that the artist had on her own work, spending considerable time describing her own methods and art practice. It is coherent, informed, and imaginative. It's also sustained, but sometimes shows description rather than explanation. So as she picks up most of the criteria from level 4, with the odd descriptor from either side of this level, i.e. one from level 3 and one from level 5, this helps to place her accurately in mid-band level 4. Assessment objective 4 in the written element evaluates how effective the whole document is in using all of her research combined with her insight and presentation skills to produce a coherent and personal viewpoint or argument. As with the other assessment objectives, Ivy is placed in mid-level 4. Ivy's conclusion gives great insight into how her contextual studies have informed and influenced her practical work. However, it does not really give us any greater information about how the artists she has studied resolved their aims to address the issue of how life is ephemeral, as she states in her final sentence. As with the other assessment objectives, Ivy falls into the middle of level 4. Her study perceptively informs her practical work, but falls short of being authoritative. It is imaginative and informed, fulfills its intended aims, and is purposeful and coherent. This last page of her essay is perhaps less insightful as a conclusion than earlier pages. So for a final evaluation, let's return to an earlier page. In this slide, at one point, Ivy is talking about Seung Hwan Oh's portraits that are self-destructing due to fungal growth intentionally encouraged by the artist. She finishes the paragraph on this artist with the sentence, "I admire this series as the results were completely based on unpredictability and experimentation." Her reasons earlier in the paragraph are related to the technique and process of creation rather than the visual effect of the techniques and the aesthetics of the work. This approach is typical throughout the essay and shows engagement and some perception, but again falls short of authoritative analysis and exciting conclusions. So one can clearly see from Ivy's completed personal study performance calculator where she falls and what mark she achieves. This is a very easy decision, but let's now look at what would have happened if Ivy's calculator had looked something different, like this. This is an imaginary calculator for Ivy, simply to illustrate a less obvious situation. Even though Ivy scores in level 3 for AO1 and level 5 for AO3, it would still result in Ivy achieving a mark of 11. This is because she still hits all the criteria in level 4, and the ones in level 3 and level 5 effectively cancel each other out, drawing her back into the middle of level 4. Here is another fictitious calculator for Ivy to illustrate a different point. You can see in this one, by scoring in just level 3, without scoring anything in level 5, would have drawn Ivy to the bottom of level 4 with a mark of 10. Please remember that these last two slides were hypothetical. In reality, Ivy scored equally in all of the assessment objectives to place her firmly in the middle of level 4 on a mark of 11. So to summarize, you can see how if used correctly, the performance calculator is an excellent tool for fine-tuning candidates' marks. Once the marks have been generated by the performance calculators, you can transfer them to the assessment grid. And here is Ivy's completed assessment grid with the marks completely transposed. Please can we remind delegates at this point that the performance calculators for the practical element of component 1 and the performance calculator for component 2, which is all practical work, are identical, and so are the common standards. It is only the personal study performance calculator that is unique to the written element. Now that you've completed Module 1, understanding the assessment requirements, please move on to Module 2, where you can practice applying the performance calculators to 8 exemplars at a convenient time and place. The exemplar used in this module, Ivy, would have demonstrated how to accurately apply both the practical performance calculator and the personal study performance calculator. If at any point you need any clarification or a refresher, feel free to go back to Module 1 in your own time and pace before moving on to Module 2. On completion of Module 3, we will reveal the marks and explain why each mark was awarded for the 8 exemplars you marked in Module 2. I do hope you enjoy the exercise, and good luck with your marking.